Welcome back, deep divers. Ready for another plunge into the depths of cinematic weirdness?
Always game. What do we got on the dissection table today?
Well, today we're tackling The Substance. That 2024 body horror flick that's got everyone either praising it as a masterpiece or, well, calling it utter nonsense.
Oh yeah, The Substance.
If,
I've heard. Let's just say, strong opinions on that one.
Yeah.
Definitely a film that gets under your skin. Pun intended, of course.
You always were one for the subtle humor. But yeah, it seems like nobody walks away from this movie feeling neutral. It's either brilliant or baffling, sometimes both at the same time. And a lot of that has to do with the premise, right? A celebrity using a black market drug for a seriously extreme makeover. Think Dorian Gray meets Cronenberg with a hefty dose of Hollywood satire thrown in.
Yeah, that's a pretty good cocktail of influences.
And behind the bar mixing this crazy concoction, none other than Coralie Fargeat, the director and writer who brought us Revenge, another film that definitely wasn't afraid to push boundaries.
I remember Revenge.
Yeah.
Intense stuff. Definitely established Fargeat as a filmmaker to watch.
Totally. And for The Substance, she's assembled a seriously talented cast. Demi Moore, Margaret Qualley, Dennis Quaid, all taking on roles that, let's be honest, probably made some of their agents sweat a little.
Understandably so.
Yeah.
This isn't exactly lighthearted rom-com territory.
Not even close. So today, we're going to dissect the movie's twisted plot, those buzzworthy performances, and even delve into some of the behind-the-scenes magic, especially those practical effects that had everyone talking. Basically, we're going to give you the complete lowdown on The Substance and why it's sparking so much debate. So buckle up, deep divers, because we're about to get messy.
I do love a good mess.
Okay, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's lay the groundwork. What's the story here? Remind us what The Substance is all about at its core.
Right, so picture this. We meet Elisabeth Sparkle, played by Demi Moore. She's a 50-year-old aerobics instructor. She's got this long-running TV show, but
She's getting a little too seasoned for Hollywood's taste, right?
sadly, yes. She gets unceremoniously booted from her own show. And the reason? Ageism, plain and simple. Delivered with zero sensitivity by the show's producer, Harvey, played by Dennis Quaid. It's pretty brutal to watch, honestly.
Ouch. Yeah, that's gotta sting. So how does Elisabeth react to this professional and, let's be honest, pretty personal blow?
Well, she goes down a path you might say is unconventional. She ends up getting her hands on the substance, this mysterious black market drug that promises to turn back the clock to make her young and beautiful again. It preys on those insecurities that, sadly, are all too real, especially for women in an industry obsessed with youth.
Right, and it's not just a little pill or a magic potion, is it? This transformation is something else.
Something else is putting it mildly. Elizabeth injects this activator serum, and out pops Sue, literally from a split in her back. Sue's played by Margaret Qualley, and it's a scene that's burned into my brain, let me tell you. Definitely not for the faint of heart.
Oh, I bet. So now we've got two women sharing one body. What are the ground rules for this bizarre cohabitation situation?
Okay, so they have to switch consciousness every 7 days. Well, one's in control, the other's basically out cold, kept alive by IV fluids. It's a strange arrangement, to say the least.
Definitely strange. But there's a catch, right? Something about a stabilizer fluid.
Exactly. The one who's active needs daily injections of this fluid, which, and this is where it gets creepy, comes from the other body. It's like a twisted life support system. And here's the kicker. If they skip the switching schedule, the original body starts aging, like rapidly, irreversibly. We see what happens to Elizabeth's finger when Sue gets a little too caught up in her new life and forgets about their little arrangement.
Oof, yeah, that scene was rough. But it sets up the central conflict, right? Sue's out there living it up. She even takes over Elizabeth's old job, lands a huge New Year's Eve show, while Elizabeth is basically a prisoner in her own body, watching her younger self enjoy everything she feels was stolen from her.
It's like a twisted reflection of that initial ageism that kicked everything off. The younger version thrives, while the older one is relegated to the shadows, literally and figuratively.
And it's not like Sue's exactly handling this with grace and maturity.
Not really.
Yeah.
She gets caught up in the whole fame and fortune thing, starts partying, ignoring the rules. And Elizabeth, well, she starts to pay the price, physically, aging way faster than she should. The tension builds, the resentment grows. They start seeing themselves as completely separate beings, forgetting that they're still fundamentally linked.
So where does this all lead? What's the breaking point?
Elizabeth, now looking like a frail old woman because Sue's been hogging their shared body, tries to kill Sue. It's a desperate act, born out of this feeling of being completely robbed of her life. But then, in a really disturbing twist, She ends up reviving Sue. It's like her
Correct.
desire for the very validation that Sue's getting overpowers her anger. It's really messed up commentary on how societal approval can warp our thinking.
It's like a dark mirror held up to our obsession with youth and beauty. Really unsettling stuff. But of course it doesn't end there.
Nope. Sue finds out what Elisabeth tried to do, and, well, she doesn't take it well. She attacks and kills Elisabeth. The original source of their shared existence is gone.
So, problem solved.
Oh no, this is where it gets even more unhinged. Without Elisabeth, Sue can't get the stabilizer fluid anymore. Her body starts to deteriorate rapidly. So she does something incredibly reckless, ignores the warnings, and tries to create yet another version of herself using the activator serum. A really desperate and, as it turns out, disastrous move.
Enter monstro illusory, right?
Yeah.
The stuff of nightmare.
Exactly, this monstrous amalgamation of Elisabeth and Sue. It's the ultimate expression of body horror, the consequences of pushing things way too far.
And then it all explodes, right? Literally and figuratively in the film's climax.
Yeah, during the New Year's Eve show that Sue had been working towards, Monstro Illusory, wearing this grotesque mask of Elisabeth's face, takes the stage, and the audience, well, they freak out. The whole thing descends into chaos. The creature's violently killed, and in the final haunting moments, Elisabeth's original face, detached from the monster, crawls onto her Hollywood Walk of Fame star. She has this final hallucination of being admired, worshipped, then melts into a puddle of blood. The end.
Talk about a bleak ending. Really makes you think, even if some of the imagery might make you want to shield your eyes.
Definitely not a film you just forget about. Which brings us to the real meat of the discussion, right? What's this movie actually trying to say? Because there are a lot of different interpretations floating around.
A lot of debate, a lot of strong opinions.
For sure. A lot of people, and understandably so, see this substance as a commentary on the intense pressure women face about their bodies, especially in Hollywood. The fear of aging, the need to conform to these unrealistic beauty standards. It's a feminist reading and a powerful one.
But not everyone agrees with that interpretation, do they?
Not at all. There's a whole other side of the argument that sees the film as, well, exploitative, maybe even misogynistic. The argument is that even though it's trying to critique these beauty standards, it still relies on those very same tropes in imagery. The graphic depictions of the female body, the nudity, the transformation into this grotesque creature. It's a valid concern.
So is the substance empowering or objectifying? It seems like that's the central question at the heart of this debate.
It's tricky, isn't it? It definitely doesn't shy away from showing the female form in all its states, vulnerable, transformed, grotesque. And the way the camera lingers in certain scenes, especially on Margaret Qualley's body, it definitely raises questions, even if the ultimate message is supposed to be deconstructing that kind of gaze.
It's playing with fire, that's for sure. And then, of course, there's the whole body horror aspect, the visceral transformations, the mutation, the gore. That's all there.
Oh, yeah. The substance leans hard into that genre. It's got shades of Cronenberg for sure, but it's also part of this new wave of body horror, a lot of it from female and non-binary filmmakers that are using the genre to explore all sorts of interesting themes. Coming-of-age anxieties, female desire, challenging patriarchal structures. It's a whole different beast from the classic slasher flicks.
So where does the substance fit into all of that? Is it a worthy contribution to this new wave of body horror, using those shocking visuals to deliver a powerful message about the toxic nature of beauty standards? Or does it stumble, maybe even backfire, reinforcing the very things it's trying to critique? It's a tough line to walk.
It really is, and there's no easy answer. Ultimately, each viewer has to wrestle with those questions, with the film's intentions versus its execution. It's messy, it's provocative, and it definitely sparks conversation.
And sometimes that's what art is supposed to do, right? Make us uncomfortable, make us think. Now, I'm curious about how this whole crazy vision came together. What can you tell us about the making of the substance? Any interesting tidbits from behind the scenes?
Well, for starters, this is only Coralie Fargeat's second feature film. She could have easily gone the blockbuster route after Revenge. We heard she even got offers from Marvel. But she chose to stay independent, to produce this film herself, so she could have complete creative control.
Wow, turning down Marvel. That's a statement.
It really is. Shows how passionate she was about this project. And the screenplay wasn't something she whipped up overnight. She spent about 2 years developing it, drawing some inspiration from her earlier short film, Reality Plus Solstice. The seeds for this story have been brewing for a while.
And get this, the idea for that insane birth scene, Sue bursting out of Elisabeth's back, that came to Fargeat while she was in the shower. She even called it the movie's core DNA. That's some serious shower thought inspiration.
Definitely not the kind of shower thought I have. But it speaks to how this film is built around those visceral, shocking images. And her writing process wasn't just about staring at a blank page. She actually used music to help her craft the script. She'd listen to experimental music to evoke that heartbeat feeling, the creation of a new being. And for the Pump It Up show scenes, she listened to hypersexualized music to get the right vibe. It's interesting how music can be a tool for building a whole cinematic world.
Makes you wonder what's on her Spotify playlist. But yeah, it's clear she had a very specific vision. And finding the right actresses to embody these characters must have been crucial, especially since there's not a ton of dialogue in the film. They had to convey so much through their physicality.
Casting was definitely key. Now, for Elisabeth, the original, you'd think Demi Moore would be an obvious choice. But believe it or not, Fargeat didn't initially consider her. She thought Moore would never go for such a demanding, unconventional role. Several other actresses passed on the project before the script finally landed in Moore's hands.
And it wasn't an instant yes, was it?
Nope. It took 6 meetings, Fargeat really laying out her vision, the challenges, the themes, everything. Moore was drawn to the meta-narrative, how the film reflects Hollywood's own ageism, and she connected with Fargeat's passion. Plus, she saw a bit of Fargeat in both Elisabeth and Sue. Since filming, Moore has said it was a tough role, but incredibly rewarding.
So Fargeat really fought for her vision, and it paid off. And what about Margaret Qualley, who plays Sue? How did she end up in the film?
Well, there's a fun little Hollywood connection there. Demi Moore actually worked with Qualley's mother, Andie MacDowell, years ago.
Ah, the circle of Hollywood life.
Exactly. Qualley said she was attracted to the role because Sue was so different from her, and she had a feeling this film was going to be something special. Both roles required a lot of physicality. Qualley trained for months, lifting weights to get the right physique for Sue. Even practiced Sue's mannerisms around her apartment. Said it freaked her husband out sometimes.
I can imagine. Okay, let's talk about the actual filming. I heard they did some interesting things to capture those really intricate shots, especially with all the prosthetics.
Yeah, they did a lab shoot during the last month of filming. It was a smaller crew focused on these detailed insert shots, close-ups of injections, the back splitting open, really intricate stuff that needed extra attention.
And talk about dedication. Apparently, Fargeat even doubled for Demi Moore in a shot where the activator serum's being injected. Seriously hands-on directing. And the crew size fluctuated wildly. A handful of people for those intimate lab shoots, then over 200 for the big practical effects scenes. Really dependent on the needs of each shot.
I remember the Infinity Tunnel sequence. It looked so cool. How'd they do that? CGI?
Nope. The cinematographer actually came up with a really low-tech solution. He used 2 bicycle tires surrounded by LED lights, spun them around a stationary camera, created the illusion of endlessness without any fancy wiring or digital tricks.
That's brilliant. Resourceful filmmaking at its best.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to ask, what's this I heard about Dennis Quaid? And a ridiculous amount of shrimp.
Oh, you heard that story too. Apparently, for a lunch scene with Moore, Quaid ate about 2 kilos of shrimp. That's like 4.5 pounds. Some serious dedication to his craft, I guess, even if it involved a whole lot of shellfish.
Now that's method acting. Okay, I also heard that Margaret Qualley had a pretty tough time with the choreography for the Pump It Up show. Yeah, she's a trained ballet dancer. But the style of this show, very hypersexualized, was way outside her comfort zone. She called learning the choreography a nightmare, especially since she was working with professional dancers who'd already mastered the moves. She even had a bit of a meltdown during a rehearsal, so much so that she ended up taking private lessons to get up to speed. And on the day of the shoot, she was still so nervous that she admitted to partaking in some liquid courage beforehand.
Wow, even professional dancers get stage fright. But she pulled it off, right?
She did. And looking back, she said she was proud of herself for doing it, especially since most of her other scenes were more subtle and restrained.
It's always great to face those fears and come out on top. Now, what about Demi Moore? What did she think of working with Coralie Fargeat as a director?
She found Fargeat to be very visually oriented, focused on symbolism. Fargeat would often start scenes with tight close-ups, not wide shots, which was different from Moore. It's like the visuals, the symbols were the priority. But Moore also really respected Fargeat's eye for body language. She worked with a movement coach to develop the specific physicality for those later scenes, where Elisabeth is physically deteriorating from aging.
Sounds like a very collaborative yet very demanding environment. We also heard that Moore had some health issues during filming.
Yeah, during a break in filming while Qualley was shooting her scenes, Moore got shingles and lost a bunch of weight, like 20 pounds. It definitely added another layer of complexity to those scenes where Elisabeth's body is breaking down.
A reminder that even Hollywood glamour can be grueling work. And even though the film's set in Hollywood, most of it wasn't actually filmed there, was it?
Nope. They were going to shoot some establishing shots in LA, but then Fargeat realized she could just use palm tree test shots as backdrops. So the only thing actually filmed in LA was a still photo backdrop for the canyon scene. Almost the whole film was shot in France.
Ah, the magic of movie making. Okay, let's talk about the real stars of the show, at least visually. Those amazing special effects. We know they used a ton of practical effects and prosthetics. Why was that so important to Fargeat?
She was really adamant about it. Wanted to use practical effects for 70 to 80% of the film. She felt CGI wouldn't have the same impact, wouldn't convey that visceral feeling of violence and transformation. They used a crazy amount of fake blood, 21,000 liters. That's over 5,500 gallons. For some scenes, they even used a fire hose to get that blood splattering effect in one take. The cinematographer was shocked by how much blood Fargeat wanted.
I bet. That's a lot of blood.
Yeah.
Talk about commitment to the vision.
Yeah.
And the sets themselves, Elisabeth's apartment, the theater, they looked incredible.
Yeah, those sets were no joke. It took 3 months to build them, and every detail was carefully considered. Elisabeth's apartment had this huge panoramic window, symbolizing her past and Sue's future. Fargeat wanted it to feel timeless, even futuristic. They almost used LED screens for the cityscape view, but ended up going with a massive painted backdrop. It gave it a more classic Hollywood feel.
And that bathroom set where so much happens, that must have been a challenge.
Definitely. Fargeat wanted it to be this abstract, empty mental space for Elisabeth. No furniture, no personal touches. For that mirror scene when Sue's being born, they actually built 2 identical bathroom sets to get the reflection right. And the scene where Moore hits her head on the shower floor, they built an extra tall shower set just for that.
Talk about attention to detail.
Yeah, and get this. After they finished filming in the apartment, they tore it down to build a theater set in the same space. Efficient use of resources. They wanted to use a real theater, but with all the blood they planned to use, no one would let them. So they built their own.
What about the costumes? They really helped to visually define the characters.
Absolutely. The costume designer created very distinct looks for Elisabeth and Sue. Elisabeth's costumes were often more masculine, power suits, bold colors. Her yellow coat, iconic. It was custom made. The designer went through tons of store-bought options and hated them all. Moore even questioned if the coat was too much for LA summer, but Fargeat insisted. She loved it so much that she kept it after filming. Sue's costumes, on the other hand, were more revealing, more sexualized. It played into her hedonism, the pressures she embodied.
2 sides of the same coin, visually represented through their clothing. And with a film this visually complex, the editing process must have been intense.
Oh yeah, 3 editors, including Fargeat herself, worked on the film. The first cut was 3.5 hours long. They refined it, experimented, and it actually grew to 4.5 hours before they finally trimmed it down to the release length. They even had separate editing rooms, swapping scenes to get fresh eyes. Some scenes went through dozens of versions. The theater climax was the toughest to edit, apparently, because the practical effects weren't always consistent between takes.
And sound design must have been crucial too.
Absolutely. The sound really enhanced the visuals and themes. Like in the scene where Elisabeth goes to get the substance, the sound shifts from city noise to a more eerie, deserted suburban soundscape, foreshadowing the danger and secrecy. Then, inside the storage facility, it's all metallic scraping and droning tones. Just adds to that feeling of unease.
So much thought went into every aspect of this film. It really shows. Now, let's talk about the actors. Demi Moore, especially, got a lot of praise for her performance.
Yeah, a lot of critics saw it as a career comeback for her. Some called it her most intense, layered role ever. She won a Golden Globe, a Critics' Choice Award, a SAG Award, and was even nominated for an Oscar.
That's a serious sweep. And Margaret Qualley, she really pushed herself physically for this role, didn't she?
Oh, absolutely. All that weight training, mastering the choreography, she really went all in. And then, of course, there were those monstro prosthetics later on.
Yeah.
Those are a whole other level of challenge.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. Ray Liotta was originally cast as Harvey, but sadly he passed away before filming. Dennis Quaid ended up taking the role, but Liotta still gets a mention in the director's thank you notes. A nice tribute.
It is. But back to the monstro prosthetics. Qualley straight up called wearing them torture. She had a team helping her get in and out of that suit, but apparently crying inside it was a nightmare. Tears and mucus just collecting inside. They had to constantly clean and re-glue the pieces. It took 6 hours to apply the full suit, and she filmed in it for 8 days. The materials even gave her terrible skin breakouts that took over a year to heal.
Oh, wow, that's rough.
It was. They used a cooling vest, like race car drivers wear, to keep her from overheating inside that bulky suit.
It's amazing what actors will go through for their art. Okay, those special effects deserve their own deep dive. Who was the mastermind behind those transformations?
That was Pierre-Olivier Person and his company, Pop FX. They worked on the substance for 11 months pre-production and filming. And believe it or not, they weren't Fargeat's first choice. She'd hired another company but hated their designs, thought they were too masculine. Person sculpted a model of Monstro Lisa Sue in just a few nights, and Fargeat was immediately on board. They spent a month refining the design. It's interesting how a last-minute switch can sometimes lead to the perfect collaboration.
Right, it's about finding that shared vision. And Elizabeth's transformation was broken down into 5 stages, right? Each with a pretty evocative name.
Yeah, the Finger, Requiem, Golem, Monstro, Elisa Sue, and the Blob. It's like a descent into body horror hell. And Fargeat didn't want these transformations to look realistic. She wanted them to be deformed, unsettling, reflecting the character's internal state, which actually caused some friction with Person and the lead makeup artist. They thought Elisabeth should be more conventionally beautiful, at least at first.
But Fargeat stuck to her guns.
She did. And the time it took to apply the prosthetics varied wildly. 45 minutes for the simpler ones, up to 7 hours for the full transformations. Sometimes they only had a tiny window to actually film. Talk about pressure. And there's a story about Demi Moore actually insisting they reshoot a scene because she thought her prosthetics had started to deteriorate. She didn't want to disrespect the special effects team's hard work by using subpar prosthetics, and that's a real pro.
Respect. And they even made custom breast prosthetics for Margaret Qualley's nude scenes.
Yet to get that specific, idealized, almost cartoonish look that Fargeat wanted for Sue, Qualley even joked about having to glue those on to get the rack of a lifetime, just not my lifetime. A bit of dark humor about the whole artificial beauty thing.
Okay, I have to know, how did they pull off that Sue birth scene? It was so visceral.
They used a combination of prosthetics on body doubles and puppetry. They built 2 hyper-realistic silicone dummies, no faces, and they each took a month to make. The whole sequence, except for one close-up of the eye splitting open, was all practical effects. The back-splitting open shots were filmed using those dummies on a raised set, operated from below by a team of puppeteers. Fargeat directed from under the set or right next to it. For the stitching scenes, they used the dummies and also prosthetics on the actresses. They were really obsessed with the skin texture, making it look real. Even added pores, cellulite, used a pointillist painting technique with multiple colors to match real skin tones.
That's incredible. I never would have guessed.
It's amazing what they can do these days. And speaking of detail, even the finger, the first stage of Elisabeth's deterioration, was a challenge.
What happened?
The first attempt looked totally fake, like something out of a cartoon. It took them a whole month to get it right. They even had to stop working on other prosthetics until the finger was perfect. And they redesigned every prosthetic stage at least twice during production. It's crazy how much work goes into those details that most viewers probably wouldn't even notice.
It's all about layering those subtle touches to build a believable world. What about the Requiem stage when Elisabeth's aging starts to accelerate?
Yeah, those prosthetics took 5 or 6 hours to apply. Person even compared it to a long dental appointment. And he praised Moore for her patience and professionalism during those grueling sessions. She was amazing. They used fake body parts for some shots, like her leg in the shower. And for that stuck kneecap scene, they used a modified chair to hide her real legs and show these creepy mechanical-looking prosthetic ones. To get that translucent skin effect, they used thin prosthetics that showed the veins and bones underneath. It was all about those unsettling details.
And the Golem stage. Even more extreme.
Definitely. More extensive silicone prosthetics glued directly onto Moore's body. To get the look of veins, they actually embedded red and blue wool fibers in the silicone. It looks so real. Silicone's good for action scenes because it moves like real skin, doesn't wrinkle easily. But for the scene where Elisabeth runs down the hallway, they used a thinner body double to emphasize that unnatural movement. And for the mirror smashing scene, they created a fake head that bled on cue. Qualley smashed the fake head, then Moore mimed the action with her real head. The effects team blended the shots together.
Seamless. Okay, let's talk Monstrolisis, the ultimate nightmare fuel. How did they bring that creature to life?
That was a huge undertaking. Fargeat and Person were totally in sync about the design, but they had limited time. So Person got another company, Igor Studios, to actually build the suit. The final design had 5 different heads, 2 full-body suits, 2 partial suits, and a detailed mold of Moore's head. All practical effects, except for Moore's screaming face in a few shots. They used photogrammetry scan, a 3D model made from photos, Person was inspired by artists like Niki de Saint Phalle and Fernando Botero and Cronenberg's The Fly. Qualley ended up doing most of the close-ups in the monstrous suit because Fargeat wanted her performance, her ability to convey emotion, even under all that latex. Person and Fargeat even wore the suit sometimes to get specific shots, and working with that blood-soaked latex was a challenge. They had to constantly repaint it, dry it, even sprayed vodka inside every night to stop bacteria from growing.
Vodka.
Who knew? Sounds like a wild ride behind the scenes. Okay, let's wrap up with how the film was received. It premiered at Cannes, right? It did. Competed for the Palme d'Or and won Best Screenplay. It even got a standing ovation at its premiere. A pretty good start.
But I heard the distribution was a bit bumpy.
It was. Universal was supposed to distribute it, but they backed out, worried about the extreme content.
Makes sense. This isn't exactly a crowd pleaser.
Nope. But Mubi picked it up and gave it a theatrical release, and it became their highest-grossing film ever. They had a really interesting marketing campaign, very artsy, thought-provoking, generated a lot of buzz online.
So did the critics love it or hate it?
It was a mixed bag, honestly, mostly positive reviews, but some really hated it. Moore's performance and Fargeat's direction were generally praised. A lot of critics called it a body horror masterpiece that tackled big themes, but others thought it was genuinely bad, all shock and no substance, pun intended. So that initial divide in opinions continued.
No surprise there. And what about awards?
The Substance won the Oscar for Best Makeup and Hairstyling. Well deserved. It was also nominated for Best Picture, Best Original Screenplay. Best Director Fargeat was the first woman ever nominated for writing and directing a horror film, and Best Actress for Moore. It also got some Golden Globe and SAG nominations. And, fun fact, it did really well at the box office in Mexico. Clearly, it resonated with audiences there.
It's fascinating how a film like this can have such a global reach, despite, or maybe because of, its polarizing nature. So there you have it, deep divers. We've dissected The Substance from its twisted plot to its incredible effects, its awards buzz, and all the controversy in between.
It's a film that throws a lot at you. Visually, emotionally, thematically. It's not always easy to watch, but it definitely sticks with you.
And it forces us to ask some uncomfortable questions about ourselves, about our culture's obsession with youth and beauty. So as we surface from this deep dive, we want to leave you with this. The film focuses on this literal substance that promises transformation. But what are the less obvious substances in our own lives that might be shaping us? The societal pressures, the trends, the technologies. What are we consuming and what's it doing to us? Something to ponder as you go about your day. Thanks for diving deep with us.